All right, so I am joined by Benjamin Willis. He's uh,
Howdy, howdy.
he's an animator for DreamWorks.
Yeah.
What's uh what's your exact position?
I am a supervising animator, so basically that means they're usually about four or five of them on a film. There's if I was to go through the hierarchy, there's like a head of character animation, which is in charge of the entire all of the animation on the film, and then there are the four or five supervising animators that are just under that kind of they have their own teams of animators that they look after, and a lot of times the supervisors are they usually lead a character, so they're usually in charge of animating one character primarily, and making sure that all the other animators on their teams kind of keep them on model and make sure that they're animating and acting the way that character would. So if that makes sense. So I'm a supervising animator, and I am currently on Trolls 2. I'm primarily in charge of. I mean, we do things a little bit differently from film to film, but I'm primarily in charge of Poppy and Branch, who are two main trolls uh, uh, in the film, and technically, I guess I can't really spoil too much for you, but there are more trolls that we will see in the second film.
Okay.
But I'm going to be in charge this time primarily of uh, the main trolls that you saw from the first film. So
Okay.
that's what I'm going to be in charge of. Yeah.
Let me just go back and read off your credits here so people get an
All right.
understand of so you started with Kung Fu Panda, then
Yep.
Madagascar Escape to Africa, Shrek Forever
Yep.
After, Kung Fu Panda 2, Puss in Boots, Rise of the Guardians, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, Penguins of Madagascar, Home, and then that was just all your regular animator credits. And then
Yes.
as a supervising animator, you were on Trolls and Boss Baby.
Yep.
And then you were nominated for an Andy Award for the Trolls Holiday TV for what was outstanding achievement for character animation in an animated television broadcast production.
Yep. Yep. That was
So
kind of awesome. Yeah. It was a short film that we kind of like a TV show that we made for the Trolls. That's in between Trolls 1 and Trolls 2. So um, yeah, yeah. So that's what I was nominated for.
nice. All right, so why don't we can we go back to high school and I guess how did you become interested in the arts, and then I guess how did you decide where you wanted to go to school?
I had done a little bit of drawing. Like my mom used to take me to museums and such, and we would draw, some of the sculptures or some of the paintings and whatnot. So they don't really have at Central Catholic. They didn't really have a lot of art school and art classes, and they had one in particular that I did have a lot of fun with, but it was just like one thing. And honestly, I didn't really even think too much about getting art. Was just kind of something that I did for fun. When it comes to junior year or senior year, all of a sudden you get someone who, like a guidance counselor, who will like go, so, if you're thinking about going to college, where do you think you want to go? And I was like, I was like, I have no idea. Not that I didn't have any interests, but there was nothing that stood out to me. So I got this like alphabetical list of all the possible majors that you could take, in any college
Yeah.
or whatever. And it was alphabetical, so I was like, well, I don't want to be an accountant. I don't want to be an architect. I don't want to be in business. I don't want to be a chemist. I don't want to blah, blah, blah. But in the A's, there was like an art major, and I was kind of like, maybe. I kind of put like a maybe next to it. And then I realized after I went through that whole list, I was like, I pretty much said no to everything except I said maybe to art. And so the guidance counselor, I kind of returned to her, and I was like, the only thing I'm really thinking about is like art, maybe, just because it sounds fun, or it sounds like something that I might enjoy doing. And she was like, here you go. And she like put this big pamphlet to the Savannah College of Art and Design.
Yeah.
The SCAD has this really nice, thick like pamphlet that like showcases all the different majors you can take there. And there are a few other schools that I went to visit with my mom, but I was really impressed when I went to visit SCAD.
One of the main reasons you went to SCAD though is because of the computer art program,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
like what drove you to like why did you like the computer art over like traditional or
Yeah, I'll say that like I didn't know what I wanted to do in art. I wanted to do something like that, but it's true. I had seen Toy Story, and movies like Jurassic Park and that sort of thing, and I was really in awe of the visual effects. You know what I mean? The computer effects of like seeing the dinosaurs come in, or even Toy Story, which was made entirely in the computer. Um, I did have one 3D program that I kind of played around with, and when I was in high school, but I didn't like do too much with it. But what drew me to SCAD, for instance, was that we had to do this tour of a library, or they took us around campus to show us different buildings, to see different majors and what the buildings were like. And there was this one tour that I was taking where I went by this classroom, actually in their library. So I wasn't even expecting to see anybody working on anything. But we went by this one classroom, and I just saw one person. I like snuck my head in, and I saw one person working on this one computer, and they had a model of like just a human, just like in T pose, and he was like rotating around it and kind of manipulating it and changing shapes and then kind of spinning around it. And something about it where I was like, that just looks like the coolest thing ever. And one of the other main reasons why I went to SCAD rather than some other schools is that, at least when I was applying to college, most other schools treated 3D graphics and computer stuff like that as like postgraduate sort of stuff. So you couldn't get your bachelor's in it. You usually had to go for your master's in that sort of program, and I didn't really feel like waiting, you know what I mean, until like I already had a degree to like get into it. Yeah. And SCAD was one of the few schools that actually offered an undergrad program called computer art. So basically it encompassed like Photoshop and Illustrator and After Effects and all this different kind of stuff, but it also incorporated 3D animation and whatnot. So that's why I chose to go there. But when I got into college, I was really interested in the 3D animation, but those beginning courses for like the first year or two, you take all the fundamentals, so like drawing and illustration and 3D design, where you're sculpting stuff and all the basics, which were great, and I really enjoyed it. But then I finally got into an intro to Maya class. Sorry, it's my cat. I got an intro to Maya class, and it was all about learning Maya, which is a 3D software package. And at the end of the class, our final project for it was to model either a city or a town, or a battleship, or any number of things. But one of the things we could model was Tasmanian Devil, so Taz from Looney Tunes. If you modeled a character, you have to make them walk, jump, and do one other thing or something like that. And I'm not a very like romantic person per se, but I was in the computer lab one night, and I finally got Taz all rigged up with bones, and he was moving just fine. It's weird, like when I was animating it, it was like, as you do in college, like it was like 1:30 in the morning, you know what I mean, and everybody's in the lab just like, working on their personal projects, and I just had this moment where I like fell in love with it. I was like, I could see myself doing this for the rest of my life. To me, I think that's what's really important, is that especially with like art and whatnot, like I don't think people would get into art field if they didn't love what they were doing. You know what I mean? Like I think because art, requires so much, not only time and effort and energy, but it also requires so much of us like personally. So like in our art, there's so much of like us that we put into it. That's why sometimes it's so hard to be like critiqued on our art. Because it's like, even though it's just a still life drawing, it's like, but you made those decisions, you made those shapes, those shapes and those lines, and you put your heart, into it, and it's hard for it not to be personal. But I think that's why it's so important that in order to deal with how hard it is to get a critique and all the hours that you have to put into it, I think you have to love what it is that you're doing.
So after school, after college, you pretty much started working in the business like right away, right? How did you put yourself in that position? How did you pretty much get a job after high school? What did you do? What steps did you take?
Well, what I'll tell you is that I guess it's kind of part of my mantra, is that like you want to make yourself as lucky as possible, if that makes sense. Because looking back on how I got my job, so much of it is luck. Because to say that I was like the most qualified person, or I was the most talented person, or whatever, to get that job is just not true. I mean, you have to be able to animate, and you have to have decent, interpersonal skills. But um, honestly, a lot of it is just like timing and luck, and when I say like make yourself as lucky as possible, what I mean by that is like just getting yourself into a position so that when timing does work out, or when luck maybe goes your way on something, that you have your reel ready, to give to somebody, or that you're ready to step up to the plate. Actually, it's kind of like Tom Brady now that I think about it. Not that I'm saying I'm Tom Brady. That's not what I'm saying. But it's sort of
Yeah.
similar, where it's kind of
Yeah.
like he practiced and worked his butt off, so that if there was that chance one day that he could get into the spot, that you could take advantage of it, and that you could shine and be able to put forth your best effort. So for me, it was specifically how I got into the industry was, I worked my butt off in college to try to make sure I had a really good reel, and I made sure that my portfolio was put together nicely, and I really tried to, you kind of, it's not like I had to go to Savannah College of Art and Design, because I think regardless of where you go to school, it's always about what you put into it,
Mm-hmm.
is what you'll get out of it, sort of thing. When I finished school, um, I had my portfolio ready, so anytime someone came, I had my portfolio ready to give to people, and also I was sending my reel out to as many places as I could, just to get like feedback, or to like if there were any opportunities for me to get hired. Also, and in reality, I got rejected by all of the major film studios like Pixar, Disney, Rhythm and Hughes, which does visual effects, like ILM, and all those different companies. But I did get hired at this place called Charlex in New York City. And one of the main reasons I got that job was because I met an alumni from SCAD, who did really like my work, and wanted me to come work on a short film with them. So I worked on this thing called One Rat Short. It wasn't, I mean, it was, you can see it online, I think, if you do a search for One Rat Short or whatever. It's this weird love story with two rats. And anyway, but it was, like, for instance, it was keyframe animation. So a lot of times in animation you can do motion capture, or which is, someone dressing up in a suit and you get all the data of their movement, and then you try to just like clean it up so it looks nice. I was more concerned with doing keyframe animation, which is like, I'm setting all the keys, and I'm crafting all the animation myself. Since that's what I wanted to do, and this short film was a way to do that keyframe animation, I was kind of like, cool, I'll do this for a little bit, and at least I'll get paid to animate, and I'll get better at my animation while I'm doing that. And for me, I was just very, very fortunate, because when I got to Charlex and I worked there, I worked my butt off, and I impressed at least a couple of people, because one of the people that I talked to had a friend over at DreamWorks, and so when the project ended, he was like, hey, give me your reel, I'll send it over to the guy, my buddy over at DreamWorks. And that was kind of like a quick way for me to get my reel in front of the recruiters over there, and then they liked my stuff, thankfully, and gave me a call, and then the rest is history there.
That seems like a good spot to segue into your thoughts on animators versus other visual artists, and
Yeah.
do you think that animators are more or less creative, or you're not actually like creating something new, or especially like a character animator at a studio, where you're animating another person's like creation or their idea.
Yeah.
So does it ever get like frustrating, or like are you unsatisfied artistically, not being able to to create?
So I think it brings up two. I think that brings up two good points. So being an animator on a film at like DreamWorks, for instance, you're working on someone else's vision. It's someone else's, like, it's the director's vision. Ultimately, this is not your personal project. So there, and it still is a job in that sense, that you're trying to do the best you can to fulfill that person's vision. Now, with that said, there is still a lot of creative freedom within that. For instance, on the Trolls Holiday Special, there are a number of times where I'd get launched on a shot, and the director, would say, like, okay, in this scene, Branch walks from here to here, and he says this line, and he's feeling really sad about it, and what do you think? Like, do you have any thoughts or whatever? And a lot of times, the animator can come up with an idea where it's kind of like, yes, he's going to be sad, and I was thinking about trying this idea, or Or what if Branch, instead of walking over, what if he, tripped on this thing and then corrected himself, and then there was a pause, and then he delivered his line. Or and even though you're still trying to deliver what the director wanted, there's still a lot of times where the director is counting on you to plus and to bring things to the shot that maybe they didn't think of. And in fact, in a lot of ways, animators know the characters better than the directors do, because we spend all this time. Our average quota is I animate about 4 seconds of animation a week. So if you can imagine, like, I'm spending a lot of time, just like I'm spending 45 hours of a week dedicated to 4 seconds of this character's life on screen. And so I'm intimate with like every detail of how they move and how they look and what the shapes are of their face and what keeps them on model. And a lot of times there is a lot of collaboration back and forth between the animators and the directors. And on top of that, for me as a supervising animator, I get to get onto a film early. So, for instance, I'm on Trolls 2 right now, and that isn't released until 2020. And we are not going to start animating any sequences until maybe September of this year or so, hopefully. So in this meantime, we're doing a lot of development work. So I'm working very closely with the character designer. So there's a person who typically just does all the designs of the characters and how they're going to look, but usually in 2D. And then I work with the modelers, who then take those 2D drawings and convert them into 3D, so like into an actual 3D mesh and something in the computer. And then you've got riggers who will put all the bones to allow us to like move the character and deform like the cheeks and everything. And I get to be with all of those different departments all along the way, giving them feedback and doing draw-overs and telling them about the personality and asking for new controls, or saying that I would like an adjust on the model so that it looks a little bit more appealing. So, so I definitely have more of a hand in the overall look of the film than a lot of people in a lot of other departments do. And I think a lot of it is because animation, we always joke that it's DreamWorks animation and not DreamWorks layout or DreamWorks lighting or DreamWorks, modeling or something like that. We always joke that we're like the stars of the show, the animators. But because we work so closely with the director, more than a lot of other departments do, and because we're essentially like the actors of the film, that we do get to have a lot more input than most other departments do.
Nice.
And then if I was to compare, and then I think to go back to that first point we were talking about, where how does it compare to other disciplines and that sort of thing. The funny thing is that like to make an animated film, even a short film or a feature length film, it requires, as far as I'm concerned, almost every artistic discipline there is, to collaborate together and to work together. Like we at DreamWorks specifically, we usually just grab people who are good at very specific disciplines. So like you got a really good painter, so we put him in the painting thing. Like someone's good at animating, so you just animate. Not that people can't cross the line, but if you look at the course of a film, like films is an art. So obviously we're making a film, so like you've got a director, you know what I mean. So someone who's actually directing the scene and composing the camera and all that kind of stuff. We've got actual digital cameramen, or like guys, well, real cameramen, but we'll use digital cameras, to compose shots. We've even got a motion capture studio where we can dress in those suits where we've got all those dots, and the head of layout, who's the kind of the cameraman, essentially can come down and grab this thing that looks like a camera, but it's not real, but it's got dots on it, and the computer will track where that camera's aiming, so he can actually pretend to be on a virtual set and move that camera around like a real, DP would on set. We have matte painters who are painters that paint those like huge backgrounds in the distance. So like if you watch Kung Fu Panda, and there's this scene where Po and Shifu are fighting over a dumpling. If you looked at the background, like the ground that they're on was all modeled and textured, but the background is all a painting, because you don't want to model and texture all that kind of stuff. It's all painted. We've got, like I said, a character designer, so that's like an illustrator who's designing characters and putting them to life. You've got modelers. Those are kind of like sculptors. You know what I mean? They're essentially sculpting the form, just in the computer, you know? I find animation to almost encompass almost practically any kind of like art form you can think of. You know what I mean? From acting to painting to modeling to, you know, directing and cinematography. And it's one of the few art forms where I get to interact with people from practically all different disciplines, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I said, my biggest philosophy, like I mentioned, was like, yeah, just to make yourself as lucky as possible. And so for me, what that meant was, regardless of the outcome of what job you get or where you end up going, because there's only so much that you can control, right? You can't force your way into your dream job. You know what I mean? You can't. You just have to accept that you could work your ass off. Pardon my French. You could work your butt off, you know, as much as possible and not get your dream. And unfortunately, that's just a reality. If DreamWorks didn't give me a call, I was going to go right back to New York City, where my first job was, and just keep grinding there. You know what I mean? I was going to keep going to commercial houses there, keep working on my skills, and keep on, you know, trying to head towards my goal. So like my goal was to become a feature film character animator, and that meant that I was going to mainly look for jobs that had character animation in it, that had keyframe animation in it, that had, you know, subject matters that I kind of dug. You know, I would apply to like all those jobs as much as I could. I would go to forums and I would ask people in those forums like to take a look at my work and to give me some feedback. And then any other spare time that I have, I'd work on tests, you know, animation tests, and, you know, just continuing to like hone my craft and, you know, trying to take feedback well, trying to keep putting yourself out there. I think the biggest thing for me was that it's important to love what you do. Brainstorm, start putting that stuff together. It's the only thing. I think they did a study on this. I think I had heard it on NPR not too long ago, that the only indicator of the only like personal trait that actually correlated to success in life, whether it be monetary or having a career and that sort of thing, if that's how we're going to measure success in this case, the one trait that they felt like was consistent across a lot of successful people was grit. And what I mean by grit is this ability to put in the hard work that you need to achieve your goal or your dream, and the ability to get knocked down and to get back up and keep going. None of this is fair. And I think that's the best way to think about it, is like, just realize none of this is fair. And it's not fair for anybody. The only thing that is fair is that it's unfair for everybody. That's the only thing that's fair about it.